Say you have built up a £400,000 pension pot. The standard advice says a safe withdrawal rate sits close to 4% a year. That is around £16,000. But look at what retirees actually do with a pot that size, and the real number is closer to half of that, around 2%. That is not a rounding error. It is roughly £8,000 a year, sitting untouched, year after year, while the person who saved it tells themselves they are just being sensible. This is not really about running out of money. It is about something I have started calling the retirement spending puzzle, the strange fact that the same person who saved with total discipline for 40 years suddenly cannot bring themselves to spend what they built. I have watched this play out with people who did everything right, saved diligently, followed every rule, and then froze the moment they were finally allowed to enjoy it. In this video, I want to show you a different way of managing withdrawals, a rule that lets you spend more in the good years and pulls back automatically in the bad ones, so the fear has somewhere to go instead of sitting in your chest every time you check your balance. If that sounds like you, if you saved carefully for decades and now find it strangely hard to actually spend the money, hit subscribe. I am going to walk you through the exact rule that has helped people like you give themselves permission to enjoy what they built. But first, let's look at how big this gap really is. Because being careful with your pension might be costing you more than being careless ever would. One retirement researcher in the United States, David Blanchett, spent years studying what retired couples actually do with their savings, not what the textbooks say they should do. He found that the average retired couple draws down only about 2.1% of their pot each year. The figure that would have safely supported a 30-year retirement through almost every market condition since the Great Depression is closer to 4%. Put that on a £500,000 pension pot. A 4% withdrawal is £20,000 a year. A 2.1% withdrawal is £10,500 a year. That is a gap of £9,500 every single year. Over 20 years, that is close to £190,000 left sitting in the pot instead of being lived. Why does this happen? It is not carelessness, and it is not a lack of information. Decades of disciplined saving build something psychologists call a saver identity. For 40 years, the habit that kept you safe was putting money in and leaving it there. Then you retire, and the same brain that built that habit is asked to reverse it overnight to start taking money out on purpose. Loss aversion research suggests a loss feels roughly twice as painful as an equivalent gain feels good. So when you plan a withdrawal, part of your brain treats it the same way it would treat a market drop, even though nothing bad is actually happening. This is not about being bad with money. It is about being human. Your brain learned over 4 decades that spending equals danger, and now it is protecting you from a threat that no longer exists. It shows up in small, ordinary ways. Someone who could comfortably cover a mortgage payment and still have room to spare will hesitate over a better seat on a flight, or put off replacing a worn-out sofa, or check the thermostat twice before turning the heating up on a cold evening. None of that hesitation is about the number in the account. It is the old habit of saying no, still running quietly in the background, long after the reason for it has gone. The invisible cost of that protection is not a crash or a scam. It is years of comfort, of travel, of time with grandchildren, quietly not spent, because the fear never got switched off. So if the math says you can spend more, why does every instinct tell you not to touch it? That is the trap, and it is built into how withdrawal rules actually work. Most people assume a fixed 4% rule solves this. It does not, because a fixed rule was never designed to react to what is actually happening in the market, or to give you a reason to trust it. There is a framework built specifically to solve this, and it has a name that sounds more complicated than it is. It is called the Guyton-Klinger guardrail system, and the idea behind it is simple. Instead of locking in one fixed withdrawal for life, you start with a base amount, then let it move up or down depending on how your investments perform. Here is how it works in practice. You start by withdrawing a set amount, say £20,000 a year from a £500,000 pot. If your portfolio grows well beyond where it started, you get a raise. Spending rises by around 10%. If your portfolio falls well below where it started, you take a temporary pay cut. Spending drops by around 10%. In an ordinary year where nothing dramatic happens, your income simply rises with inflation. The part that matters most is not the maths. It is what the guardrails do to your head. Once you know the plan will automatically correct itself if the market drops, you do not need to white-knuckle every downturn wondering whether you should stop spending. And once you know the plan will let you spend more when things go well, you stop leaving money on the table out of habit. The guardrails give you permission that a fixed number never can. Think about the year your car insurance renewal jumps by a few £100 right after a strong run in the markets. Under a fixed rule, you would simply absorb it and worry in the background. Under the guardrail approach, if your portfolio has grown well beyond where it started, the plan has already built in that room, and you pay the higher premium without a second thought. I used to think the fixed 4% withdrawal rule was the gold standard, the safe answer you gave anyone asking how much they could take out. Then I watched retirees freeze in 2022 when markets fell, cutting their spending far more than they needed to, simply because nobody had told them when it would be safe to relax again. That is when I understood the fixed rule itself was quietly causing the underspending problem. The guardrails are the fix I wish someone had shown me years earlier. Here is the trade nobody mentions, and it is worth saying plainly. A fixed 4% rule is built to survive the worst 30-year period in history, which means in most other periods it leaves you with far more money than you needed, money that could have paid for the life you actually wanted. Guardrails ask you to accept short, temporary cuts in bad years in exchange for permission to spend more in every ordinary and good year in between. If you never build in that kind of flexibility, the long-term cost is not running out of money. It is spending your entire retirement more cautiously than the numbers ever required. So that is the technical framework. But the bigger question is why so many people cannot pull the trigger even when a plan like this tells them it is safe. That is the psychology behind it, and it is the part most retirement planning skips entirely. There are 5 things that stop people from spending money they have already been told is safe to spend. The first is loss aversion, the one we have already touched on. A planned withdrawal registers in your brain the same way a market drop does, even though one is a choice and the other is chance. The second is ambiguity aversion, the fear of things you cannot fully predict. Care costs, how long you will live, what inflation does over the next 20 years. Because you cannot know these numbers for certain, the safest feeling response is to hold back, even when holding back has its own cost. The third is identity shift. After decades of being the person who saves, spending can feel like betraying that version of yourself, even when the spending is exactly what the money was for. The fourth is tax paralysis, the fear of tipping into a higher tax band. Most people overestimate how much tax a normal withdrawal actually costs them, and that fear alone is enough to stop them taking money they are entitled to. The fifth is inheritance guilt, wanting to leave something behind for children or grandchildren, while slowly depriving yourself of the life that money was meant to fund in the first place. It is completely normal to feel some or all of this. You spent your whole working life being told to save and save again. Nobody ever sat you down and gave you permission to stop. Your brain is not broken. It is doing exactly the job it was trained to do for 40 years, protecting you from a threat that used to be real. Here is the reframe worth sitting with. Your pension is not a pile of money to be preserved for its own sake. It is a basket of future experiences, paid for by a lifetime of effort. Every year you spend less than you safely could is a year those specific experiences quietly disappear. They do not roll over. They do not come back later. I have watched people sit across a table with £800,000 in savings, genuinely afraid to take out £25,000 a year, an amount their own numbers said was completely safe. I have felt that same tightness myself, the first time I drew money from my own ISA rather than adding to it. Overriding 40 years of wiring takes real, deliberate work. It does not happen just because someone shows you a spreadsheet. Once you understand why the fear shows up, the next step is making the spending itself automatic, so you are not relitigating this decision every single month. Here is a simple 3-bucket system that takes most of the emotion out of it. The bucket system splits your money into 3 mental accounts, so you are never deciding in the moment whether it is safe to spend. The first bucket is your cash floor. This covers 1 to 2 years of essential spending held somewhere completely safe and instantly accessible, an easy-access savings account or premium bonds. If your essential spending is £20,000 a year, you would hold somewhere between £20,000 and £40,000 here. This bucket exists so that a bad month in the stock market never touches your grocery bill, your council tax, or your energy bill. The second bucket is your income portfolio, covering roughly 3 to 5 years of spending. This sits in lower-risk investments such as short-term gilts or a bond fund, giving you a reliable bridge between the safety of cash and the growth of the stock market. This is the bucket you top up your cash floor from each year. The third bucket is your growth bucket, the remainder of the pot, invested for the long term in a diversified mix of shares. This is the part that needs to keep growing, because it is what refills the other 2 buckets over the years ahead. Once a year, not once a week, sit down and check the buckets. Top up the cash floor from the income portfolio, and top up the income portfolio from the growth bucket if it has had a good year. That single annual check is enough. You do not need to watch the markets every morning to know whether your GP prescription or your council tax bill is covered this month, because that answer was already decided a year ago, not this morning. Then comes the step that actually changes behavior. Set up a monthly standing order from your cash floor into your current account, treated exactly like a salary used to be treated. This removes the moment-by-moment decision of whether you are allowed to spend, because the decision was already made once, when you set up the buckets. Here is the part that surprises most people once they try it. The same money that felt too precious to touch inside one large pot suddenly feels like ordinary housekeeping money once it lands in a current account each month, the same way your salary once did. The psychological wall around it simply disappears, not because the money changed, but because the way it arrives changed. It works the same way your energy bill direct debit already works. Nobody agonizes over whether to let that payment go through each month, because the decision was made once when the direct debit was set up. Treat your own retirement income the same way, and the monthly question of whether you are allowed to spend simply stops being a question at all. So you have the framework and you have the psychology behind why it works. The real question left is what actually happens over time to the person who uses it, compared to the person who keeps doing what they have always done. That comparison is worth seeing clearly. There are 2 paths from here, and most people are already walking down one of them without realizing it. The first is the fragility path. You keep withdrawing around 2% instead of 4%, topping up with your state pension and taking the bare minimum from your own pot. 20 years later, because you spent so little and markets did reasonably well over that period, your pension pot is often larger than when you retired. On paper, that looks like success. In practice, you have missed the years when travel, family time, and simply doing things were easiest to enjoy, back when your health and energy were at their best. Retirement researchers describe something called the retirement spending curve. Spending tends to be higher in the early active years of retirement. It eases through the middle years, then it rises again later in life as health and care costs increase. If you underspend early because fear is running the show, you are cutting the years the curve says matter most, the years you are least likely to get back later. The second is the resilience path. You spend closer to 4% or 5%, using the guardrails and the bucket system to adjust as conditions change. In good years you get a raise. In bad years you take a temporary planned cut, not a panicked one. 20 years later, Your pot may be smaller than the fragility path would have left you, but you have lived a fuller version of the years when it mattered most, and you still have a working buffer for later life. This is an honest trade, and it deserves saying plainly. You are giving up a small, real chance of a bigger pot near the end in exchange for a fuller life along the way. Neither path is wrong, but only one of them is usually the one people meant to choose when they first pictured what retirement would feel like. The question is not whether you can afford the life you saved for. It almost certainly is affordable. The question is whether you will give yourself permission to actually live it. And there is only one person who can grant that permission. Let's bring this together. We have covered the 2% trap, the gap between what is safe to spend and what most people actually spend. We have covered the Guyton-Klinger guardrails, a rule that lets you spend more in good years and adjusts automatically in bad ones. We have covered the bucket system that turns your pension into something that feels like an ordinary monthly income rather than a pile of money you are afraid to touch. And we have covered the psychology underneath all of it, the traps that keep good, careful people stuck. The real risk was never running out of money. For most people watching this, it is arriving at the end of a life you could genuinely have afforded, and realizing you lived a smaller version of it by accident, not by choice. If you are a lifelong saver who is ready to learn how to actually enjoy what you built, hit subscribe. I am Arthur, and this channel exists to give you the tools and the permission to make the most of your retirement, not just the numbers on the statement, but the life those numbers were always meant to pay for. So here is the only question left. What would you regret more at 92, holding on to the money or letting yourself enjoy it? Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one.